The snow came heavy that night, wrapping the small town in silence, and covering the earth in a blanket of white so deep it seemed to erase the world itself. Only the faint glow of a few wary streetlights broke through the storm. Roads lay hidden, cars stood abandoned, and the wind moaned through the empty streets like a chorus of lost souls. At the far edge of town, tucked behind a crooked picket fence, stood a little wooden house. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, a lone sign of life in the frozen stillness. Inside, an elderly woman named Margaret sat by her fire, knitting quietly. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, her wrinkled hands steady despite the storm's fury outside. She had spent many winters in that home, but this one felt especially cold. Her husband had long since passed, her children lived far away, and the nights often stretched on endlessly. That evening, as the blizzard howled louder, Margaret closed her eyes and whispered a simple prayer. That everyone out there in the cold might find warmth and safety. She had no idea how quickly that prayer would be answered, or how it would change her life forever. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of compassion, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and tell us in the comments what kindness means to you. Don't forget to subscribe to Stories of Kindness, so we can keep bringing you moments that warm the heart. The knock came suddenly. It rattled the old wooden door so hard, Margaret nearly dropped her knitting. Her heart skipped. At her age, visitors in the middle of a blizzard were rare, and often worrisome. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and shuffled to the door. When she opened it, her breath caught. Standing there, half buried in the swirling snow, were 15 men. Broad-shouldered, leather-clad, their jackets marked with a name that sent chills through many Hell's Angels. Their beards were frosted white, their faces raw from the biting wind, and their boots sank deep into the snowdrifts. Behind them, their motorcycles stood in a crooked line, nearly swallowed by the storm. Margaret's knees trembled. These were men people whispered about. Tough, wild, dangerous. The kind most would avoid at all costs. But then she saw beyond the reputation. Their lips were blue, their hands stiff, and their eyes wary. Whatever else they were, tonight they were just human beings. Cold, stranded, and desperate for warmth. Without hesitation, Margaret stepped aside and said softly, "Come in before you freeze." The men exchanged surprised glances. Most people shut doors in their faces. Yet here was a frail old woman, no taller than their shoulders, inviting them into her home without a second thought. One by one, they entered, stomping snow from their boots. The little house seemed to shrink under the weight of leather and steel. But the air quickly filled with the sound of thawing boots, crackling fire, and sighs of relief. Margaret didn't waste time. She hurried to the kitchen, gathering whatever she had. Bread, canned soup, a bit of leftover stew. It wasn't much, but she served it with a smile, bustling about as though she had been expecting them all along. The bikers sat awkwardly, their massive frames crammed onto her floral couches and wooden chairs. They weren't used to this. To kindness, to gentleness, to being seen not as threats but as people in need. Outside, the storm raged harder, shaking the windows like a beast clawing to get in. Inside, warmth spread. They talked, laughed hesitantly, and shared pieces of their story. How the blizzard had caught them off guard, how the roads had closed, how the motels had turned them away. Without shelter, they would never have survived the night. Margaret listened quietly, her eyes soft, her heart steady. She poured coffee, handed out blankets that smelled faintly of lavender, and watched as one by one, the rough men drifted off to sleep. Wrapped in her quilts, their snores filling the tiny home. For the first time in years, her house didn't feel empty. She smiled to herself, thinking that though she had never had sons, tonight she had been blessed with 15. By morning, the storm had passed. The world outside sparkled, a sea of snow glittering under pale sunlight. The bikers woke slowly, stretching and thanking her in gruff, sleepy voices. Margaret made a simple breakfast. Eggs, toast, and coffee. And soon the sound of laughter filled the room again. When it was time to leave, the men found their bikes half buried but still standing strong. Their leader, a tall man with steel, gray eyes, turned to her and said, "Ma'am, we'll never forget this." Margaret smiled, patted his arm, and wished them safe travels. Then, with a roar of engines, they disappeared down the snowy road, leaving her standing on her porch, watching until the last echo faded. She thought that was the end of it. Just a strange, beautiful memory of one snowy night when her house became a refuge for those the world had labeled dangerous. But kindness doesn't end. It ripples, multiplies, and finds its way back when you least expect it. The very next morning, as Margaret was scattering crumbs for the birds, a distant rumble made her pause. At first, it sounded like thunder. Then louder. The ground trembled beneath her feet. She clutched her shawl and looked down the road. And then she saw them. Motorcycles. Not 15 this time, but 100, stretching as far as her eyes could see. Their engines growled in unison as they approached, the same insignia gleaming on their jackets. Neighbors peeked nervously from behind curtains, but Margaret stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. The tall leader dismounted first, walking toward her with something in his hands. A bouquet of fresh flowers. In the middle of winter. He smiled, the kind of smile that carried gratitude, not menace. "We told the brothers what you did for us," he said. "Word spread. You gave us shelter when no one else would. We don't forget things like that." And then Margaret saw what they had brought. From the backs of their bikes came bags of groceries, boxes of clothes, bundles of firewood, and tools. Some repaired her fence. Others shoveled her driveway, fixed her porch, and filled her home with laughter and noise. The little house that had once been silent now pulsed with life. Margaret hadn't felt this alive in years. She realized something profound that day. Kindness always returns, multiplied many times over. What she had given freely, without expecting a thing, had come back 100-fold. Even the men the world called dangerous carried hearts capable of deep gratitude, loyalty, and honor. As the sun dipped low, the bikers revved their engines one last time. A thunderous salute to the woman who had opened her door on a freezing night. Margaret stood on her porch, waving as they rode away into the sunset, her eyes glistening with tears. And though her home was quiet once again, it no longer felt empty. She knew she had family now. A family bound not by blood, but by kindness. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in hope, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness so we can keep spreading warmth in a world that needs it. And tell us, would you have opened the door that night? Let's talk about the courage it takes to choose compassion when the world tells us to be afraid. Because Margaret's story isn't just about one snowy night. It's a reminder that kindness is never wasted. It plants seeds that bloom in the most unexpected places. Sometimes all it takes is a warm fire, a simple meal, and a door left open in a storm. To change not just 15 lives, but 100, or maybe more. And that night, as Margaret sat again by her fire, she smiled softly, knowing she was never truly alone.